This tutorial is intended to provide some specific instruction on creating a relief using Enroute's 3D relief tool. We touched on it briefly in the introduction, and this tutorial will go into a little bit more detail to show how this very powerful tool can be used to create a wide number of different types of surfaces. Even though it's relatively simple looking, there's a tremendous amount of options available for how the reliefs can be created using even just this one tool. The simplest way to create a relief is to choose an option, whether I want it to be rounded, beveled, or flat. Choose how I want it to be added to the relief. In this case, I want to add it to the relief. And if I'm creating a relief from scratch, adding it and intersecting it will give me the same results, which probably makes sense. And then depending on the option that I choose, and we'll talk real specifically about the difference between the normal relief and the constant height relief when we look at some examples here. But depending on the option that I choose, I would either specify a height or an angle. So if I have chosen constant height, then of course I want to specify what that height is. If I choose normal as my option, specifying a height is not necessary, and so in that case I would specify an angle. I always want to specify the resolution of the relief that I want to use, and 100 dpi is a pretty good default number to use in most any case. If you go with small reliefs that are real high definition, you likely would want to increase that resolution. If you're doing something quite large that you're going to be cutting out with a large tool, then it makes sense to go with a lower resolution because it reduces the memory requirements for the relief, makes it easier to display and to manipulate, and also speeds up the toolpathing of the relief. So in this case, with this rectangle, let's say the simplest option is to choose rounded, normal, give it an angle, and click apply, and you'll notice that in this case, just a couple of seconds you create the surface, and if you wanted to, this is at this point this is ready to toolpath and then output. If I choose another option, say a beveled option for this shape, pretty much the same thing applies. I just click apply and then that surface is created. So you can see based on the options that I chose what those shapes are. Now what's interesting about this, of course, is that I can combine effects, which starts to give you an idea of how I can use these relatively straightforward tools. I can use them to create a pretty wide range of finished shapes. So what I'm going to do is take this surface that I created a beveled surface on. Now I'm going to tell it that I want to create a round surface. I want to add that to my original surface. Let's say I'm going to decrease the angle here, make it rather subtle, click apply, and when I look at it in the perspective view, you can see that that surface has been rounded, and so it's not just a beveled surface anymore. It's a combination of a rounded and beveled. If you're cutting out graphics, like say for example this text, that can give you the ability to create some very nice options, very nice finished surfaces. So now I've created a pretty typical beveled surface there. Now I'm going to tell it that I want to have a rounded surface. I want to add that just like we did on the last one. And you can see that I've got now a combination of rounded and beveled that gives me a really interesting effect that would be difficult to create even using a 3D modeling program, it would be very difficult to create that effect, particularly as quickly as we did in just a couple of keystrokes and a couple of mouse clicks. So gives you the option for creating some very interesting surfaces. Now what I want to do is give you an idea of sort of next to each other what these different options look like, and I'm going to use this text just as a way to demonstrate that. So what we'll do is zoom in on that. First object, I'm just going to do what we did last time, rounded, normal. I'll give it a pretty standard 45-degree angle. Click apply, and you get that rounded effect. Now if I wanted a slightly different effect, same option, now just constant height. I'm going to give it a height instead of an angle. You notice that the angle is grayed out in this case because it's not appropriate for the options that I've chosen. And I do get a different effect. If I look at this in the perspective view, if I look at that in the perspective view, the constant height is saying that the surface height, the overall height of the relief, is constant through the letter. So as I get into narrower and wider areas, the program automatically adjusts the height of the relief to keep that constant height. Whereas in the normal relief, as I get into the wider areas, the relief is taller, and if I go flatter, you can see that effect. The relief is taller. Then as I get into narrow areas in this E, you can see that the relief drops down right there. Whereas in this option, even though the overall relief is quite a bit taller, but you can see that that height is constant. And now what's interesting about the way Enroute works with that, particularly the constant height option, is it automatically identifies corners that the relief is going into, so that the relief makes a very natural taper down into the corner, and the program doesn't try and maintain the constant height into the corner. And so what you end up with very little effort is quite a natural looking surface. Where the contour goes into a corner, you get a very nice miter into the corner, and the result is a very pleasing surface that you did not need to make any particular decisions about as far as how that was going to happen. The program takes